Good evening, Luqman Nation. My name is Abdul Shahid.
And I am Jacqueline Luqman, and this is Live in Luqman Nation.
I would like to welcome you for an impromptu show. This is not usually the regular day that we come. We come to you mostly on Sunday, every Sunday and Wednesday, that which is our regularly scheduled show. But today, sometimes things come our way, or we're involved in interesting discussion, and things hit us, and sometimes we just can't wait for Sunday. So a lot of times, because we can, we just say, well, hey, look, there's something that is of interest to us,
right, and
we like to share it with our audience. And so this is why, this is a lot of times we come up with these impromptu live streams, and so be it tonight. We like to welcome those of you who have joined us. At this time, we're going to just be informal. We're going to wait for you guys to just settle down, get your little hot beverage. I have mine right here on the side, my coffee. Get your coffee, tea, whatever you want to do, and just relax. I know that a lot of you guys are coming home from work, and maybe you might can't catch everything, but you can catch us later. Before I go on, let me get all the other business stuff out of the way. You can like us on, please like us on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, Twitter, follow us on Twitter. We can't do this without contributions from you. So we have a Patreon account, and so if you like what we're doing, if you like the guests we have, like yesterday, we had a very interesting guest, Jackie.
Oh, man.
Miko Pele. Right? That's
Miko Pele, yeah.
Miko Pele.
Yeah.
I mean, man, we had such an awesome time speaking with him.
Yeah.
And our audience did too. I mean, we had thousands of views just on that one live stream.
Yeah.
And he was really taking us into really what's happening on the ground with relations to the Palestinians and the Israelis,
right,
and giving us a lot, by him being an Israeli citizen himself and an American citizen, and he's the son of an Israeli general,
right?
So he came on and he was gracious enough to come on the show yesterday, and we had a good time.
Yeah, we really did, and the information that he gave us, he explained a lot of things that we thought most people just don't get.
Right.
And it was great because he was not afraid to talk about issues that, we weren't clear on. He set us straight on a couple of things.
Right.
And he was just really honest about part of the history, which we weren't able to get into all of it, but we certainly talked about some of the history of the creation of the nation state of Israel and how that's in conflict with our biblical, our understanding of the biblical Israel. I mean, please check that conversation out from yesterday. It's the Luqmans talk with Miko Pele,
right.
And if you really want to know from and Israeli, I think we need to make it clear that he's not, he doesn't have a bias because he is an Arab or because he's Palestinian. Right. He's a Jew.
Yeah,
he is an Israeli citizen, like you said. He's the son of a general of the Israeli army, so he grew up in that same pro-Israel indoctrination that everybody else grew up in. And we talked about how he got from how he went from that typical understanding to making his journey to being an activist, a human rights activist on behalf of Palestinian people.
I mean, here's a man who grew up in privilege. I mean, being the son of an Israeli general, growing up in privilege, who really didn't have to or doesn't have to take on this fight.
Right.
I mean, he could easily do what maybe millions of Israelis do, and just enjoy being an Israeli in Israel.
Right.
Where they enjoy a better standard of living, where they enjoy a lot more freedom than their Palestinian neighbors, their Arab neighbors, even those Arabs who are considered citizens of Israel. So he could have just basically rode the train, but he's a man of conscience. And he's using his privilege, if we could say that, to fight on behalf of those who can't fight for themselves.
Right.
So I mean, this is what we try to present. We are grateful that Luqman Nation, Jackie and I, that we are grateful that people take us seriously enough to come on our little small platform and share their time and their energies and their talents with us. So if you really appreciate those type of things that we try to give you, because one of the things that we are very consistent and adamant about is that we're not here for celebrity worship.
Right.
We're not here for fluff. We're not here. We are truly trying to promote the better good as best as we can on this show. And so these are the type of people who we reach out to.
Right.
And one more thing before we go into why we scheduled this live stream today, Jackie. The link is out. We were up in New York City last week.
Yeah.
On the Radical Imagination.
With Jim Vretos.
Jim Vretos. The link is out. We shared the link on our page. Some of you have received it on your page. But please check it out. Very interesting and very informative discussion that we had with Jim, and we appreciate him sharing his venue with us.
Yeah.
And we hope to do that again. So now all that out the way.
Yes.
Here we go.
All right. So we decided to do this to do this live stream, to have this discussion today. Hey, Shelly. We know your name says Lorraine, but we know who you are.
We know you're Shelly. Before we go.
Oh yeah.
A lot of noise. You see, I'm wearing my Muhammad Ali shirt.
Yeah,
today.
I like that T-shirt.
I'm wearing a Muhammad Ali shirt today to symbolize Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest fighters ever. The champ. And so this is symbolic because I put this T-shirt on as a way of giving the message that we stay constantly in the ring.
All the time.
Yeah, right. So I'm too old to box really, but these ideas, and one of the ideas that we're going to get with today. But Jackie and I are constantly sparring with people who come up with these, look, everybody's entitled to their way of thinking, or but some of it, if it gets promoted too much, is just damaging for the people that they claim to want to help.
Right.
And so this is what we are. So I'm floating like a butterfly as much as I can, but we're here to really combat a lot of these things that we feel are dangerous ideas if they ever caught hold. If the people who they're supposed to help ever really take this stuff seriously. Right.
And I love what you said about, us always being in the ring. We're always sparring. And people always think that, we're always fighting against white supremacy. Yeah, okay. In the grand scheme of things, yes, that's true. But a lot of messed up ideas are adopted by black people and leftists and so-called revolutionaries as like the be-all, end-all solutions for black people, especially the black masses, in this fight against white supremacy. And a lot of times we have to fight some of our own brothers and sisters with some of these ideas, and that's difficult. and it's tiring. And a lot of times it's like we don't even mean to be fighting with people, but people are so, and I understand where it comes from, right? Like I understand the desperation people feel at this point. In 2017, we're still fighting against stuff that our parents and our grandparents were fighting against. I understand the desperation that some people feel, feeling like, this is our last best chance to get any of this right. I can't tell you whether that's true or not. I'm sure our parents felt that way. I'm sure our grandparents felt that way, and we're still here. So I think that I understand where that desperation and clinging on to every idea that seems like this is going to be the revolutionary answer. I get why people cling to that. I get why people latch on to those kind of ideas.
Right.
The problem is reality is much more complicated, and really it's not complicated. It's just that reality does not present an easy fix to these seemingly easy ideas that we have. That on one level, the ideas might be great for some people, like what we're going to talk about tonight, virtual currency, and in particular cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Right now, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and you're right. I think that what we need to do first of all is get, and we talk about the reality all the time. I think that what we need to do is, talk about some sobering facts.
Right.
What we're going to do is, because this is such a very exhaustive, broad subject matter. So what we really want to talk about is, and I want you to explain, because it really the idea for this program actually comes from an exchange you had on social media.
Right.
And and what we're talking about today is black people and the wealth gap, the income gap, and why is it that when it comes to poverty, why is it that we're willing that we're willing to go to the extremes as far as coming up with all of these different ways and ideas on how to uplift people out of poverty, but we never fight for what we know works.
Right.
We never fight for what we know works. So what we're going to do is talk about, can the Bitcoin revolution actually be the answer for lifting millions of black people in America out of poverty?
Right.
So that's going to be the subject matter. Now let me put this in perspective. We spoke on this show a few shows back. Those of you who are with us remember this. And we spoke about how in 36 years, there's been some studies that suggested that unless things change for black people economically, that we will experience the possibility of experiencing zero wealth growth.
Having zero wealth.
Having zero wealth, having zero wealth in 36 years. We're not talking about your income. We're not talking about whether you get a good job or whether you make a good salary. We're talking about wealth, which is different than income.
Right.
And we know that black people, even under Obama, have lost a lot of ground when it comes to wealth building. 8 years of Obama really has cost us in losing the ability to access wealth. And we're going to take in, and we're also going to challenge people who we respect and admire, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, and them who, in our view, is distorting this in a way. In one of his recent writings about we were in power for 8 years. So we're gonna maybe, if we have time, talk about why Jackie, why you and I disagree with that, with respect to him. But we don't shout. I mean, and that's the thing about Luqman Nation, and that's what we try to do is that we don't hold anyone unaccountable.
Right.
We agree with you. We don't. We don't. No matter what your status is, or we're not in celebrity worship here.
Right.
So anyway, toss it back to you. So let's talk about how this conversation that you had about the Bitcoin.
Right. So honestly, to be real honest, I was completely clueless about what Bitcoin was, how it worked, what it was about, up until a few months ago. I had not heard of it. I honestly had not heard of Bitcoin.
Right.
Up until earlier this year, like maybe January, maybe last year. So we're talking about something that did not exist on the radar of most people in general. And I'm not talking about most tech savvy people, because Bitcoin is a technological creation. It is technology, right?
Software.
It's software. It's code, basically, and it is literally a virtual currency. And people will argue, well, it's not currency. Currency is just the exchange of goods for services, or services for goods, or I'm going to give you something for something else. Some people call it a trade, but if I give you something of value for something that you're going to give me that I want, whatever it was we exchanged was currency.
Right.
So let's stop with not calling this what it is. It is currency. It's just a different kind of currency. It's not physical paper and metal coins that we're used to. It is completely virtual. It is all generated and completed. All the transactions are generated and completed on what's called a peer-to-peer network, meaning you start a transaction here, and then the other end of the transaction searches for your transaction on the network. There is no, and they make that connection completely virtually on through technology. There is no oversight from the Federal Reserve. It is completely unregulated. The commercial that I like, what is it? Little Caesars, the no rules.
And it's not insured by anything.
It's not insured by anything, and that is kind of an issue, because someone just stole. I mean, literally, somebody just hacked the Bitcoin servers database, whatever you want to call them, and stole $77 million in Bitcoin. Now, of course, people can hack into banks and all the time, but see, when somebody steals your Bitcoin, it's gone. It's gone. There's no backup system that has insured your Bitcoin, so that you can go to somebody on the Bitcoin or virtual currency server and say, somebody hacked into my wallet and took my Bitcoin. You're not getting it back. So that's a downside with virtual currency. And we're going to give you the links so you can research what this is yourself. It is not easy to explain. I am not a tech savvy person. I'm the wrong person to be explaining to a bunch of people exactly what this is or what it isn't. That's not my focus. My focus is to explain why this isn't like the be all end all solution for financing the revolution. One of the reasons that it's not is because of what I just said, because it is not insured. Forget about the lack of regulation and being a type of currency and tender or a legal tender that the banking system doesn't regulate, or at least, now this is key right here, or at least hasn't regulated up until Sunday at 6 o'clock, when Bitcoin begins to start trading in futures. Bitcoin will be traded on the futures market. The futures market is regulated. So all of that stuff that people were talking about, well, the great thing about Bitcoin is that it's outside of the regulation of the monetary system and the federal government. Well, not as an investment, which it will formally be as of Sunday at 6 o'clock. Now, not saying that's a bad thing, because we actually intend to throw a little bit of money in there and see what happens. But see, this is the other part of the problem. And this is why I had the conversation with the people that I did. The idea that Bitcoin is the answer to poverty for poor people in this country is, on the surface, at the foundation, a false notion. Because, as with any investment, you need money. You need money in order to be able to buy Bitcoin. Now, it's true you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin, and at this point, you have to be rich already to buy a whole Bitcoin because one Bitcoin is worth like 16 grand now. So people are, say all the time, oh, you can invest, you can buy a portion of Bitcoin with $10. That's fabulous. That's wonderful. That portion of Bitcoin today is worth the $10 that you bought it for. Now, in 30 days, as someone responded, that $10 portion of Bitcoin might double in value to $20. Now that seems exciting, right? Here's the problem with that when it comes to what that means for poor people. If my rent is due on the 1st and I just invested this $10 that I really couldn't afford to take away from like food or clothing, but I took a chance and now I'm short this $10, but in 30 days, my $10 is worth $20. Well, my rent is still due on the 1st. And that $10 investment did not do anything to alleviate the fact that my rent's it ain't gonna pay my rent on the 1st. Right? So we're looking at two problems when in regard to poor people and this idea that virtual currency is gonna alleviate poverty. In the revolution that it's gonna be, it's the answer for poor people. Number one is the idea that poor people can afford to invest in anything, because poverty in America is on. I mean, basically, if you make minimum wage, you live in poverty. So tell me what person who has to pay rent, has to feed themselves, has to clothe themselves, and is making minimum wage or even $10 or $11 an hour, tell me what person in that situation has $10 extra that they can just, I'm not going to say throw away, but has $10 extra that they can spare. No, nobody. Right. Nobody who is poor in this country. We who have a little bit more make the mistake of assigning our ability to participate in certain things to everybody. So if it makes sense that we have an additional $10, me and him, I have 10, he has 10. If it makes sense that we have $10 extra to slide toward Bitcoin and let it sit and see what happens, we think it's just $10, and because we can miss it, we think everybody can miss that $10 because it's only $10. But see, $10 to me that I forget that I have in my purse is like 2 weeks of food for people who live 2 blocks from me, 2 blocks from us. So that's problem number one with the idea that Bitcoin virtual currency is going to solve poverty for people.
Well, let me put this before I lose this thought, is the fact that my whole take on the whole Bitcoin, and the reason why I don't think it's revolutionary, why, first of all, there has not been a such thing as hard currency for decades. There is no such thing. Bitcoin, and I'm glad that you set it up the way that you did about Bitcoin being virtual. Well, all money is virtual now.
True, that's true.
All money, all so-called money is virtual. And I'm sitting here thinking about when you said that this guy, whoever it was, stole 75 million Bitcoin stuff. There is no police officer, Scotland Yard, there is no police agency that can go to a place and say, oh, that's where the 75 million Bitcoins are at right now, because it doesn't exist.
Right.
So that's the reason why all currency now, and there was a book that I read not so long ago, I forget who the author was, but the fact that all currency now is nothing but electronic blips. One of my favorite movies, The Dark Knight, kind of showed you that when Bane went in there and made Bruce Wayne poor overnight just by hitting the computer.
Had a couple of strokes on the computer.
Just erasing what the amount says. That is what wealth really is today. Wealth is really represented not so much by silver, gold. You can't go to a place like Fort Knox and say, okay, I have this much in silver and gold or whatever minerals or whatever valuable resources that we use to back this up. No, your wealth. If your wealth, if you have $10 billion, that's because the computer says you have $10 billion.
Right. Right.
You know, so what we see as wealth today is a lot different than what people have known wealth back in the past. My personal opinion of all of these things is that Bitcoin is just another way of taking the money of people who can at least afford it. I think that, and the reason why I say that is doing a Google research for this show, and you got the pros and cons. You have people say, oh, well, Bitcoin could be used to bring people out of poverty. Then you had the other opposing view, oh, Bitcoin can't do this and can't do it. And I noticed a trend among those who promoted Bitcoin as a way of relieving poverty. They were all investment magazines. They were mostly people who it is in their best interest to get you to spend money into this thing. I have not seen anyone who represent people and the good of the people who said, yeah, you know what, Bitcoin might be something that we could use. I've never seen any agency who represents people in poverty, human rights organizations, human rights economic organizations, whose very sole job is to study these things and come up with solutions for what would it take to uplift people out of poverty. They're not tied to banks. They're not tied to any special interests. They are nonprofits, and their job is they have very smart people on their staff out in the field who represents. I seen a BBC news program today. It's old. Tony Blair and all the rest of them, and they were debating about how to alleviate world poverty. And you had this woman, I can't remember her name, but she's very, very famous Indian woman. I should remember her name. I'm ashamed of myself, but I think she won a Nobel Prize, and she was up for one. But her and they have other people, pardon me. The fact remains is that none of these people who study poverty on a global level had come up with solutions like this to lift people out of poverty. Because they understand, just like I understand, that first of all, you can't use gambling methods in order to alleviate poverty. This is what got a lot of us in trouble with Wall Street. The fact that so many people have lost what little wealth they had was because of this gambling mentality that Wall Street had. Give me a little, I'm going to flip it, and then if I flip it, then you get a return back.
Right.
That is the most idiotic way of thinking that anyone. You cannot invest your way for poor people, and I'm glad that you brought that up. The investment game, and as far as Bitcoin and something, you were correct, Jackie, to bring this up. This is not the game for poor people because you would have to have disposable income. And if something happened, and Bitcoin is not, people keep talking about the collapse of the dollar. But what about the collapse of Bitcoin? Nothing is foolproof. Nothing is guaranteed to succeed. So if Bitcoin doesn't succeed, then the people who can absorb the loss are those who can absorb the loss.
Right.
That mother who lived that mother who just got a welfare check a couple of days ago around the corner from us, who has to wait a month to do her shopping, to pay her bills and everything else with what limited resources she has. She invests in Bitcoin because everyone says that, oh, this is the way to uplift yourself out of poverty.
Right.
First of all, even if she takes her little $10, and you can't get a Bitcoin with $10 no more.
No, you can get a little teeny bit of Bitcoin.
So now what happens is you get these people, and even if you were to get people to pull together their resources, the fact remains is it is not a guaranteed, solvent, a sure way of uplifting people out of poverty. And if something happens, like another guy decides to steal 100 billion Bitcoins, and it collapses the market, or whatever it does to the market, or fluctuate, however it does, the poorest people who put their money in there are the least ones to be able to absorb the loss. So we have to understand that that like you said, the virtual thing is just like the 3-card Molly Shell game. Right. That's what it is. This is the reason why these tax shelters, these tax havens, all of this stuff is virtual. And so in order to promote this as a revolutionary way of bringing people out of poverty is really incorrect. What we need to do is to establish ways and methods that poor people have used themselves. And we're going to talk about that. Right. Which poor people have used themselves. And the fact that the liberal progressive community who promote this kind of nonsense of bitcoins to uplift people out of poverty, it's mighty funny to me that when we talk about reparations, when we talk about other things, when we talk about that, in order to uplift, for poor people to be uplifted out of poverty, you cannot ignore government intervention.
That's
you
right.
cannot ignore politics, and you can't ignore the role of which government will play in this. Mm-hmm. But the thing of it is that we want to still play these magical fantasy land things of people coming to poor people once again and saying, "Look, I got the magic solution." But you don't want to fight. You don't want to fight for reparations.
Right.
You don't want to. When I say fight for reparations, you don't want to really put up a big fight for reparations. You don't want to talk about how the international community and the financial policy, the international community, financial community is enslaving people in a way. We don't want to talk about the dispossession of land from people. Mm-hmm. People weren't born, nobody was born poor, Jackie. As the lady said on the BBC special, and she's right, the people in the Amazon weren't poor.
Right.
They had resources. They had the water. They had the medicinal plants. They had the earth gave them. They weren't poor. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? What made them? They were driven to poverty.
Exactly.
People are driven to poverty, and so what happens is the same people who are driving others to poverty are coming up with these innovative ways to say, well, we got this method where you could, but it's the same people who have driven us to poverty in the beginning. These same investors, these same people, the same Wall Street, all these players are now coming around and say, oh, you know what? We got the magic solution in order for you to get out of this this poverty. It's a game. All of this, in my view, is we got to stop looking at these things, especially as black people. We cannot afford to pay attention to these magical bullets. We can't pay attention to these people who promote these magic bullets. What we need to do is say, look, we're going to make sure that the government give us what they owe us.
Exactly.
And outside of that, we are going to find other ways, innovative ways, that we can gain capital, but we're not going to ignore the fact that government owes us, and we're going to fight that. And that can only be done through politics.
I thank you for bringing up the role of government and the fact that nobody's born poor. I watched a part of that documentary too, or that broadcast from the BBC too. And it's called Why Poverty, if you're going to look for it. We'll put the link for that on there too. And so you got farther than I did, but I loved what she said when she said that nobody is born poor. And the idea that poverty is not a situation where people are lazy and they make themselves poor. Because that's what we're told, right? We're told that black people are told it and poor white people are told it. And we heard, what was it, last week that Senator Chuck Grassley said that he has a hard time spending money on programs that provide assistance to people who spend every dime on booze, women, and movies. Ooh. Booze, women, and movies don't make folks poor. They don't. I don't care how much booze, women, and movies.
Just ask the Kennedys. They never got.
Look here.
Ask the Kennedys. They didn't impoverish them, did it?
I mean, the mob. Okay. Look, people.
Bill Clinton.
See, poverty is created. Right, when you look at what you said about people being born in the Amazon, people being born in their indigenous surroundings where they have at their disposal all of the resources they need to sustain their life, water, the earth, vegetation, food, if you're so inclined to eat animals. And if you're not, then there's plenty of vegetation to eat. All of that can be used for clothing.
Fishing,
fishing. Whatever those people want to use for trade with other groups of people. So as long as people are born in those environments, and every group of people in the world was born at some point in that environment, nobody was born poor. Poverty was created when people started to privatize those resources. See, that's what's going on in Africa right now. Don't let me go down this rabbit hole, because the whole thing about Africa is just an immense crime against humanity. But when you look at what is going on in Africa and what has been going on in many African countries, where European national and multinational companies are going into Africa, literally digging the minerals up out of the ground, making hundreds of billions of dollars in profit off of the resources that the African people were born with. Right. But they privatized those resources. And instead of sharing the profits with the African people, they take their profits and they also don't pay their taxes.
Right. So they're taking out the riches of the land, and taking them out of the country, and then don't even want to pay the taxes for the land that they're taking the riches out of.
Right.
But yet we're told that Africans can't govern themselves. But this is the same thing that they do. I mean, let's put the Africans aside for a minute. This is the same thing they do with poor people everywhere.
Exactly.
The poverty is always the fault of the people who are the victims of exploitation and land what they call appropriations or these land thefts that they're doing and someone on here, I think it was Mindy or something, said that all poverty is due to congressional lack of appropriation. I want us to think bigger than that. I want us to think bigger than just, all poverty, because that's not true. All poverty is not just due to congressional lack of appropriations. Poverty is itself, first of all, entrenched in historical exploitation of people and resources.
Right.
That's number one. Poverty didn't exist. Poverty didn't just start, the last 50 years, something like that. What we're talking about is centuries of exploitation. And centuries of land grabs and thefts and privatization, as you're saying, all of these things, and what's happening today is that it's the same system. It just transforms itself. Right. It's the same system. Whether it's slavery, whether the exploitation was due to slave trade, actually using people's bodies and stuff like that. Then it went to manifested itself into something else, and as technology progresses, we just find more sophisticated ways of doing it. But the methods haven't changed. What I'm saying, the intentions haven't changed.
Exactly.
So we have to really think bigger than that congressional thing. And if we're ever going to mount an effective revolution, if we're ever going to mount an effective resistance against what's going on, we have to educate ourselves and think a lot bigger than what we're being told. And this is not a critique of anyone. Right. I mean, this is a challenge to all of us.
Right.
And the challenge to all of us is that our thinking has to be global.
Exactly.
It has to be global. We can't just think on our little local thing or even with our country, because just like currency now is virtual, there is no more nation states, as much as they tell us that. And when I say that there are no more nation states, there are no more nation states when it comes to corporations, with the NAFTAs and all of this stuff. All of the financial and trade and everything else, there is no such thing as borders with them.
Right.
So even when we resist that, they all have the same agenda when it comes to impoverishing the world. So we can't think. We have to broaden our thinking outside of the nation state concept and realize that because exploitation and because the way of the capitalist exploitation and is global, and that the corporate assault, raw capitalism, corporate assault, all these things that we call ourselves, the fact that those who are concentrating the wealth, they live all over.
Right.
So they're global, even though they're a small percentage. So if we're going to resist and have an effective resistance towards this, we also have to think on a global scale and realize that that this whole Bitcoin and it's funny because here you got someone who, with the stroke of a keypad, took 75 million Bitcoins. Yet we're still saying that this is the thing to do.
Right. And there's no recourse for people who've lost their assets. It is imperative that we understand that regardless of what we do on an individual or community level, that can never ever take the place of holding governments accountable
Right.
for what they've stolen
Exactly.
and for what they have been complicit in helping multinational corporations
Right.
steal. That's the problem. That's the other problem I have with the whole, we need, and I think somebody commented that, we need a resource-based economy. If I'm understanding correctly, what that means is that we need to stop focusing on using currency or legal tender to purchase things. We need to, trade, I guess. If I have a cow and you have some chickens,
system, right.
yeah, and I want a couple of your chickens, but you want some milk, well, okay, I'll trade. You tell me how much milk you want, and we'll negotiate on how many chickens I get.
Mm-hmm.
That's great and fabulous if you're working in a close community with people, but that doesn't work when you're talking about working in communities across states, across nations, because who's going to agree on the value of the resources?
Mm-hmm.
You see, so even though there are, what's the word I'm looking for, microeconomic solutions that are more viable for people in poverty than, say, Bitcoin, as communities that would benefit them, that are more viable and more immediately than Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. We cannot think that those micro solutions are going to be the answer to the macro problem of how the government and the corporations have screwed us. I think we need to be very, very careful not to look at something like Bitcoin, which, like I said, probably a great investment, but be clear that it is an investment in that you are taking one bit of money, you're buying something at this value today, mm-hmm. and you are expecting the value of that thing to increase over time so that you can cash that thing in for the increased value at a much later date.
Right.
But again, when we're talking about poor people, it's wonderful that my $10 in Bitcoin a year from now might be worth $10,000, but I need to pay my rent on the 1st every month. So what is Bitcoin going to do for me when the 1st rolls around? And then when we talk about the nature of how the system changes, because here's another thing that people need to be real hip to. Whenever poor people and black people are able to capitalize off of anything in this capitalist white supremacist society, whenever it starts to become successful for us, then the powers that be change the rules. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever wondered why? Have you ever wondered why 30 years ago most of us could get a job with a high school diploma and we could start a job, minimum wage job in most places and have and afford a 1-bedroom apartment? Might not have been the best joint, but on minimum wage you could afford a 1-bed, well, at least I could, a 1-bedroom apartment, just barely, and had enough money left over.
But that's true, because I remember when I started out, when my children were real small, I had a 2-bedroom apartment and I was only paying $450 a month.
See,
that was like the late '80s, something like that.
Exactly. No, I was working at Tower Records and then Tower Video, making a little bit more than minimum wage. I was probably making, minimum wage was like $4.50 then. $4.50 or something like that. I was probably making $5 at Tower Records, and then when I was a supervisor, I was making like $6 and some change, I think. And I was able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment at around $430, $470, something like that. Just scrape by, and a couple of times a month I could scrape up enough money to go drinking on Friday. I could feed me and my cat. On all I ate was oodles and noodles, bologna, and pot pies, because you could get pot pies for $1 then. But I could afford a place to live. I could feed myself. I could clothe myself, have a pet, and drink every once in a while. Right. This was 30 years ago without a college degree. And I was able to get a job when I got tired of working at the record store. Mm-hmm. I was able to get a job as a receptionist at a lobbying firm without a college degree, with a high school diploma. Fast forward 30 years from then, and now you need a college degree to get a job as a receptionist.
Right.
Why? Why is that? Because people on the bottom, those of us working stiffs, were able to make a decent living.
Yeah, and you know,
without having to feed this beast, without having to pay all this money for tuition. Tuition was much cheaper then. So people who wanted a degree could work a minimum wage job or a part-time job, get a degree, and not graduate with a whole bunch of debt, and then get a job paying a pretty decent amount of money. Why has all that changed?
Well, and then you've seen that in 2008, and and I'm glad you brought that up because everybody was supposed to buy houses,
right?
Now this is how they play with us. Then it was and why we as poor people and the poor blacks, how we always get fooled in this, because then they say, well, everybody get houses, and then you had this housing boom, and then what happened? Then came the gambling, then came the housing bust of them doing all of these extravagant bundlings and all this financial packaging and stuff underneath the thing of people. And then what happened is the housing thing collapsed under it. Then you talk about higher education. And once again, college is the way. So now all of our kids went to college.
Right. So
now, our kids went to college, not so much to feed the economy, but to feed Sally Mae and to feed all of these people, So now they come out, did what they're supposed to do, didn't get, there's no jobs for them.
Right.
But then all of a sudden the government say, well, that sucks, there's no job, but you still owe us.
But you
not owe us, owe Sally Mae.
Owe Sally Mae.
Now, this is the thing, is the fact that during the housing crisis, it was okay for the government to bail them out.
Right.
The people that started this stuff. But then there was no will, and bail the auto industry out. But there was no will to bail out our kids. There was no political will to bail out those who got finangled.
Right.
And even during that time, once again, poor people were shamed. How dare you try to get a house you couldn't afford? How dare you not read the fine print on a contract? How dare you? So once again, poor people were shamed for just trying to have what everybody else had.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this is where, going back to our thing, this is the reason why this Bitcoin thing is okay if you have it's like going to the casino. If you got some disposable income, you want to play the slot machine, that's your right. Would I recommend the slot machine to be your financial plan for the future? No.
No.
And so this is how I look at Bitcoin, is the fact that, yes, there has been people who have made some success about it, but the jury is still out. I think that we ought to examine more, and we're running out of time, but we're going to talk about this later. We need to talk about what poor people have done to provide themselves with economic opportunities. Jackie, you mentioned about microloans. There's something called susus,
right?
Which mainly practiced by African and Afro-Caribbean people as a means of alternative financing.
Right.
It's community-based. Like microloan is community-based,
right,
which has had a lot of, it's not perfect, and there has been a lot of criticism about microfinance and how it's handled. But the criticism, the success, I should say, outweighs because there's nothing perfect. But there has been, in a lot of areas around the world, it has been, it's been seen to be successful with giving people, especially poor people. And I'm not talking about American poor.
Right.
I'm talking about, poverty, where it has really helped to give people who live in that type of poverty, entrenched poverty, a way of lifting themselves out. Again, these are tangible results that people can see. The susu, we've got information on how Caribbean immigrants and people who have took advantage of the susu have used that to help finance businesses and stuff, even amongst our midst. And so these are the things that poor people, just some of the things that poor people have used to help give themselves economic opportunities. Bartering has been another, on certain level. So yeah, locally these things can happen, but I think that for us to talk about Bitcoin being revolutionary, We need to understand what revolution means.
Right.
That term is being used too broadly.
Yeah.
And those of us who are saying that this is a revolution, it's nothing revolutionary about Bitcoin. This is just another way of investors. And I'm gonna give you a quick story. We got a few minutes, but I'm gonna give you a quick story. Bitcoin is not the first time that people have, that groups have used alternative currency to as a way of magically, as a way of how can I say, extricating yourself from the global financial system.
Really?
Yeah, it's not. There has been Muslim groups that have tried to use what they call the dinar, the gold dinar, the dinar, which was actually, you can actually hold the dinar.
Right. It's a
I mean,
thing.
There was a thing, and I don't know if it's still now, but there was a movement at one time. I was part of a Muslim Sufi movement, and I won't name the group, but they're a very large Sufi group that's still in existence, and they pioneered this movement of independence from the global market by an alternative currency, which was the gold dinar. And the dinar, you was supposed to put a certain amount of money in. The dinar was actually made of gold, so it was actually made of gold.
Right.
And so the value of it was in there, and you had to pay a certain amount of money to get your gold dinars. And just like anything, you put it up, and it was based on appreciation, depreciation, like gold and silver is.
Right.
But this was promoted. However, to fast forward this thing, a lot of people, a lot of black Muslims got into it in America and stuff, and this was actually part of a whole separatist movement by this Muslim group. It wasn't a political group.
Right.
It was political in the sense that it felt that like a lot of religious separate movements, remove ourselves from out of this secular capital, and we'll set up our own little thing. Right.
But the idea was to extricate themselves from the evil capitalist system, which is why people think Bitcoin is revolutionary.
Right. So this was done. This group actually did it. They wind up basing themselves in South Africa, but they had little enclaves around the world, which they call rabats. And so I was part of a group in America that was part of this group, and we were trying to establish this in America, and I was on the front lines of that. And so what happened was we found out that once again, when we talk about these type of revolutions and stuff like that, we have to understand that that people cannot help having their own racist biases coming away and all stuff. So the people who were the gatekeepers of this stuff, we found out that that some people were able to buy in at one price, other people were able to buy in at another price, and guess who paid more?
Oh, I wonder who.
Right. So guess who paid more? And there was also some dealings with the black members of this group, being used to prop up other members. It was something, I don't want to get off track with that. What I'm saying is that these movements come along and they're not new, and so Bitcoin is just one in many. And someone has put here about, why can't we go back on the gold standard? For the United States right now to go back on the gold standard would be disastrous. Why do you think that the government could have $1 trillion debt ceiling and nothing said? Why do you think that the Pentagon could waste trillions of dollars? You know why? Because it doesn't exist. All it is blips on a computer. All currency right now is virtual.
Exactly.
So that's the reason why nobody, not even the Republicans who's supposed to be fiscal conservatives, that's why they don't sweat when they see talking about, the new tax plan is going to add trillions to the debt. So what? It don't mean nothing. Yeah, so what? It's just numbers on a computer. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
But if we were to ever get serious, and I think we're too far gone to go back on the gold standard, but if we were to go back on the gold standard, then all of that stuff that we had created and added trillions to this and trillions to that, we would find that we would collapse under the weight of our own the roof would collapse on us, because now the money can't exceed the value of what you got in reserve.
Exactly.
Now we can print as much money as we want, and I guess this goes with the MMT people. But this is the reason why now, because they took us off the gold standard. The gold standard was just so the United States could just take this tight coat off and produce as many weapons as they could in the
Pretty
Cold War.
much.
That's the reason why Nixon did it. Nixon took us off the gold standard so we can outproduce the Soviet Union in weaponry. And the Soviet Union couldn't keep up with that because they couldn't do that. So all Nixon did was just say, well, hey, we just going to throw off the coat. We'll just print money and just tell all the industries and stuff, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all legal tender is the government saying we got you.
But it doesn't mean big IOU.
That's all it is. So Nixon threw that off so we can outproduce the Soviet Union and we would not be shackled by having our currency linked to anything of value. We just have to print money. And so that's what happened. So for us to go back to the gold standard, you would find that, yeah, we would all be in the soup lines. And no politician in America is going to do that.
And see, it's good to have real world experiences, people who have experience with these kinds of issues, because people who've never experienced like what you did, being involved in a group that actively tried to get away from the capitalist system, they don't understand that you can't really do that.
No.
Especially with, okay, let's bring this back to Bitcoin. Well, let's use your example and let's bring it back to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
In order to invest in the dinar, you had to do it with legal tender, which comes out of the capitalist system. If you don't have legal tender, which comes out of the capitalist system, you can't invest in the dinar. The same principle applies for Bitcoin and any cryptocurrency. In order for me to purchase a portion of a Bitcoin, I gotta have the $10. And that $10 comes out of the capitalist system. And the reason that's a problem for poor people, now I can't stress this enough, Jacqueline Luqman and Abdul Shahid Luqman are not telling you not to invest in Bitcoin. I see it as an investment just like any other. By Sunday at 6 p.m., the futures market is going to look at it and treat it as a futures stock just like any other. So people who are commenting saying that it's unregulated and it's outside of the capitalist system by Sunday, well, you know what? It's not outside of the capitalist system now, because you need the product of capitalism, which is money, to invest in it. I can't take our dog as just one of our possessions and give it to someone and say, here, tell me how much of a Bitcoin you will give me for Brewski. That's the only way we're going to be able to, when people say we need a monetary system outside of capitalism, that's what they mean. And that's not where we are. And unless an apocalypse happens, that's not where we're ever going to be. So for right now, I need that $10 US. And for poor people, that's where the problem is. Because these are just some statistics about poor people in this country. The U.S. population is 323 million people. There are 323 million people in the United States. 14% of those people, in general, live in poverty. That's 45 million people in general.
Mm-hmm.
Black people particularly, we are 14% of the population. Still. That's a whole nother show. I can't tell you how many times we talk about how do you maintain a population at 13 to 14% over 400 years. Okay, 46 million black people in this country. In total, 46 million of us. That's it. Out of 323 million. Out of the 46 million black people in this country. This is why Bitcoin as a revolutionary tool for pulling poor people out of poverty is bull.
Mm.
Out of 46 million black people in this country, 26% of us live in poverty. Almost a third of the 46 million black people who live in this country live in poverty. Of the black people who live in this country, 20% of black people do not have bank accounts. That's 9 million people. No bank accounts. So I signed us up for Coinbase, or at least I tried to, so we could do our little investment in Bitcoin. And just for uh, um, fair disclosure, we're probably going to invest like $100, right?
$100 hard.
100, and that's like, and I just said it, and I'm like doing the calculations,
yeah,
like,
I don't want nobody to think we got it like that.
Like, can we afford
hard dollars.
I'm trying to get our little investment in before Sunday, before it goes to the futures market. But if we both have jobs and we have to figure out, can we afford to invest? Can we afford to lose $100? Because that's the rule of investment. Don't ever invest more than you can afford to lose.
That's right. Once again, I mean, you can go to the slot market, but you want your future to turn on. But I mean, and Jackie, you brought up some good points, and I know we got to wrap up right now. So we got to come back to this. I mean, we actually got to come back to this, because what we don't want to get serious about when it comes to addressing poverty. First of all, poverty is, and I think, Jackie, what bothers me, and I'll close my part on this point. Mm-hmm. I think what really disturbs me the most when we have these discussions with people is they approach poverty as if it's a simple thing of just having a simple solution. We don't look at, and as we stated earlier, that poverty is something that was created, or that is created, and it continues to be created. Mm-hmm. It's not that more and more people are finding themselves, even in wealthy, affluent nations, being driven to poverty. So, and it really bothers me that the discussion is like, oh, well, all you have to do is this, all you have to do is that. Not to mention that poverty is a very complex mechanism. Mm-hmm. That doesn't just have one actor. Well, there's not just one. There's not just this one entity that made everybody poor. No. This is a multi-pronged, collaborative effort from government on down that have created poverty. So we can't look at this as just some laissez-faire easy solution to say, well, if we do this. And this goes to the everybody needs a business crowd. This goes to the Bitcoin people, all of this stuff. Unless it involves politics. And we will say this here. Yes, Jackie and I are from the Yvette Carnell school of this. Unless there is a concerted effort to rearrange our politics that will put money in the pockets of poor people, then every other solution will not bear fruit. You might get one or two people to escape, but you got one or two people to escape now. Right. But when it comes to uplifting the masses, to me, the business thing is the same thing that Obama told us: a rising tide will lift all boats. Yeah. So even if unless we have the type of politics, once again, that will put money in the pockets of poor people through things other than that what's given to us now, these solutions and stuff, which really aren't solutions. Once again, it's just another predatory way of other people getting money from folks who can least afford it. Right. So that's my spiel, and you can close it out.
So I wanted to close with this, I think, bedrock foundational truth about why we believe the Bitcoin is really not a revolutionary tool for lifting people out of poverty. It's because of this 9 million black people who don't have bank accounts. Like, I signed us up for Coinbase, right? And so we could buy our little portion of Bitcoin. Guess what they asked for? Bank account. Bank account information. So aside from the fact that you have to have this $10 that you can afford to lose, right? That's a problem. That's a problem for 45 million people right there off the bat. Any solution to the issues that face an entire society that leaves out automatically 45 million people, that's not and leaves them out because they are poor, because they don't have resources, that is not revolutionary. It's not. That's just another hierarchical system that's not based on quote unquote capitalism. That's another social hierarchy. That's another situation of haves and have-nots. And when you that's not revolutionary. So then you have 9 million black people out of that 45 million who don't have a bank account. So how are they going to invest in Bitcoin? Even if they have the $10, you got 9 million black people who can't sign up for Coinbase or some of the other trading platforms so they can purchase Bitcoin, because when it asks for a bank account, they don't have one, and they don't have a debit card. And because they don't have a bank account. And if they do have a debit card, it's a prepaid debit card. And what's the problem with prepaid debit cards? That poor people, you know how prepaid debit cards make their money off poor people?
Fees.
Thank you. Every transaction is charged a fee. So here you are, a poor person, doesn't have a bank card, doesn't have a debit card that's tied to a bank where your deposits, your money is in. You've got this prepaid card, and you're expected to take this $10 that you really can't afford to spend on something other than food. And every time you make a transaction with that card, you're charged fees. And then on top of the fees that you have to pay on your prepaid card, the Bitcoin or virtual currency purchasing platform charges you a fee for that transaction. So now you're paying up to $15. Now it's not just 10. Now it's up to $15. And if you're one of the 45 million poor people in this country, that's $15 you don't have and you can't afford. Because as an investor, you should only invest what you can afford to lose.
Yep.
So, listen, for all of the pluses and minuses, pros and cons, for whatever happens with our little, however much we're going to invest, I said $100, but I feel like, you know what? I don't even know if we can do $100. That kind of hurts my feelings. But we'll see. Whatever happens with our little investment with Bitcoin, unless somebody, here's a good one. Let's close on this. I'm going to close on this. This is the only way investments like Bitcoin will, or any kind of investment, everybody has their own business or, whatever you want to do. This is the only way individual efforts for wealth building will serve to lift people out of poverty in this country. This is the only way it's going to work. If the people who are making the investments take their returns from their investments and they put money in poor people's pockets. And I do mean literally. If you buy some Bitcoin and you've made, like some people have made, they've had Bitcoin since 2013 or, for years and years. The only way it will be revolutionary if those people would take some of their millions of dollars that they've made off Bitcoin and pay people's rent. Honestly. And until you are willing to do that, until you're willing to put your money literally where people's mouths are, where people are starving, where people's bills are, where people's medical bills are, buy some school clothes for some people's kids, pay off the car note, so they have that one less burden to deal with in life. Unless and until you are willing to do that with the proceeds from your new revolutionary investment vehicle, it's just another investment. And it's something that poor people in this country do not have access to. So that does not make it revolutionary. It just makes it another risky bet that some of us can afford that just might pay off. For us, though, not for them. So, all right, we are a little bit over time. Thank y'all so much for joining us.
A little closing music.
Oh, he's got his kalimba. I'm really glad to see Mindy Dunham. Thank you so much, honey, for joining us. Hey, Jason Rehnquist. I said we would be better at saying hi to some of the people who hop on our streams. We see you, Ray. Hey, Rob Baxter. Thank you. Hi, Zohar. Sam, hello. Thank you for joining us. Let me scroll down and see what else is going on. Who else is in there? Y'all were just chatting up a storm in this joint. Thank y'all very much. Justin wants to donate donates half his Bitcoin All right. Yeah. Send us a PM, and we'll figure out how you do that. That is awesome. That's what these conversations, we want them to generate action, ideas, to get people thinking about what can you do for somebody else in order to spur this little revolution along. Not little, it needs to be a huge revolution. So, all right, thank you all very much. Thanks for joining us tonight. We will be live, as far as we know, Sunday at 6 p.m. Join us then on Live in Luqman Nation. Y'all have a great evening. Thanks for joining us. Be really good to each other. Peace. You are having a good time with that thing.